It's less common for video games today to release brand new IPs. We've seen very few that have been unable to break the surface of the gaming industry in recent years. Many of them end up being forgotten about by the majority of the players months after they release. There are some, objectively, that have the potential to be the birth of a new franchise, but it should be understandable as to why we don't see as many as we used to. Developers see it as a disadvantage to start from scratch rather than making a game for a franchise that may have a lot of legacy. There will be many of their fans of that franchise that will buy it just because of the title. New IPs these days tend to feel too familiar and bland to other games. There needs to be more of an emphasis put on its world to give the definition of new IP more of a meaning. But then there's the new IPs that are successful and are mainly stated by the players as platforms. To explain what a platform is for those who don't know, instead of having sequels released throughout the years, the game instead has much longer post-launch support to keep the player counts high for years. Overwatch is one clear example of that category. Brand new, sold extremely well, and even won Game of the Year award at the Video Game Awards of 2016. But I've said many times, sales and awards don't mean anything to a game's quality. When you walk into your local game shop and see all the game's cases, you'll see a lot of quotes from reviewers and 5-star ratings plastered all over the cases to give us consumers almost that shortcut of knowledge that we need to know about the product before we buy it. Overwatch wasn't just a brand new IP, it was an introduction to its universe where all of the characters had plenty of history behind them all and they all came from different backgrounds. So on the surface you would think that this is the birth of a new franchise, but because it seems to represent itself as a platform, it may send the hopes of a bright future to be flushed away in perhaps just a few years. So let me run down one of the biggest problems Overwatch from the get-go no one thought too much of, but now the game has been out for over a year and I feel like it's the right time to discuss it. Overwatch seemingly comes across as a world that is as big as ours. But there are a few, I don't want to say mistakes, but setbacks to the way Blizzard have presented it. The first issue, I think, is the art style, which I don't think was the wrong direction to go. In fact, I think it was a great choice. However, the problem with the art style is that many of the multiplayer maps may have different weather effects and layout and setting. They just seem to have that striking similarities to each map. You can approach your strategy differently depending on your character, but there isn't much depth to how you plan out your tactics. For a mode like Escort, there aren't many flanking routes and multiple paths, so the idea simply is to just power through the defense. It sounds like a very shallow experience when you take into account that this game launched with very few modes and maps, but one of the biggest appeals to this game is that there are many characters to choose, giving you more options on how to approach your game. And I'll talk more about that soon. So back to the art style. It's a cartoon-like art style, almost identical to say an animated Disney movie. Much of the terrain and visuals on the multiplayer maps look very alike. Sure, you can change the colour and the environment, but it simply doesn't feel like a different experience when you play all the maps. Almost all of the maps take inspiration from a culture of a lot of different locations around the world, which could be telling us something that the only ways to feel different is by producing them by different cultural standpoints. You've got King's Row based off of London, so it's going to be cramped, tall buildings and cars everywhere. And then there's Hollywood, very rich looking movie sets, you get the idea. Compare this to a franchise like Halo, which unlike Overwatch doesn't have a very cartoon smooth art style. It has a more realistic and gritty art style, so it offers many different options for the developers to choose from to make maps feel and look different, like visuals, terrain, and even interactions like buttons to press that can change a section of the map. And not to mention the maps are bigger and more open, which a lot of players seem to prefer over the very linear structure like many of the maps in Overwatch. The second big mistake I believe Overwatch has simply made is the motivation to continue playing. We still find ourselves almost a year and a half later playing around with what feels like leftovers. We've played all of the maps to death and know them like the back of our hand. we've chosen and played all the characters that fit our playstyle. A few new game modes have come along after launch, like Arcade Mode and Uprising, but unfortunately both of those modes launched with only one map to play on, which I think is almost destroying the motivation to continue playing just after a few goes. Overwatch does have that replayability asset, but if the content is wavering thin and continues very slowly to bring it out, then Overwatch, at least for me, has lost that asset over time. Not to mention the loot box events that Overwatch brings out at regular intervals, like Christmas, Halloween and Easter. These events are where you have a chance of unlocking new items in Overwatch that are somewhat related to the holiday season you're in. It sounds like a great idea, but the problem is that many of these items are only available for a very short specified amount of time. So players are not guaranteed of unlocking these new items, which for the most part look pretty damn cool. This results in many of the players dropping a lot of money on these microtransactions to hopefully unlock some of the new gear in the game. But even if you were to somewhat get lucky enough to get one of these new items during the holiday season, it would be completely irrelevant within a week. I remember myself when I unlocked one of the Christmas skins for one of the characters, which I was happy with, but then come say January 1st, by then the skin I unlocked had absolutely no relevancy during that time of year. You may feel as if it's a big matter when these new loot box seasons launch, but come the time afterwards, it just felt all that time you grinded away was simply for nothing. And even if that wasn't to bother the players, the idea for having specific items that only are available for a short period of time feels so short-noticed and unfair to the players. Is it a system where players would be happy to still be invested in another year from now? In my opinion, I believe it has tolerated many of the players to simply not maybe go as far as to quit the game, but simply never feel when they are playing the game that it matters, because the chances for them to get a cosmetic item that they want is limited, and instead of achieving it through the game, which would feel much more rewarding. These issues show results of players finally putting their foot down on this game as they move on to other games, and I would say it would take something very special to bring them back. Blizzard Entertainment is a company that is well known for giving their games a very long-term support of post-launch content. They just released a new Diablo 3 expansion, a game that was released back in May 2012. Do you think it's possible for Overwatch to get another, say, 3 years of service from the company? Blizzard by now have probably moved their main interest over to their future titles, but even if Overwatch was to get another 3 years, would it still feel relevant by then? Would it still be big on Twitch, and where would the game be by then? How many more maps will be added? How many more characters will be added? If Overwatch 2 was to somehow happen, I think Blizzard would have to put so much more development time into giving the players a newer experience if we've played the original. Is there a way for Blizzard to make Overwatch 2 feel similar, but yet new and fresh at the same time? And the simple answer that I'm going to be honest with you guys is that I don't think they can. Despite that it is Blizzard Entertainment, and for them to have crafted an FPS shooter to sell very well and get good reception when they're mainly known for creating MMOs is impressive to say the least. But without splitting the community, I don't see Overwatch 2 being a thing. Overwatch will continue to bring out new content in the future, but as time goes on, the player base I'm sure will continue to slowly drop, and to guess how much relevancy Overwatch will have by say next year, I personally think will be none. Overwatch, despite the issues I have with the game, I still believe it's a solid first-person shooter game, but unfortunately as a long-term product, it falls short. To sum up my experience with Overwatch in a sentence, it was simply fun while it lasted. Drop a comment down below guys and tell me your experience with Overwatch, and tell me, do you think you'll still be playing the game say a year from now? And if so, what makes you go back and play it every time? As always though guys, thank you for watching. If you really like this video, give it a like. If you really dislike this video, obviously click that dislike button. And as always, subscribe for more future content. And I'll see you guys all again soon. Take care of yourselves. Have a good one.